Hello, welcome to Tea with Mali. Today we are here with Channapha Khamvongsa. She is the founder of Legacies of War, and we're just going to share a little bit about her inspirations around starting this organization and how much effort it takes, and the mission and the goal of the organization. Thanks for being here with
Yeah,
us.
thank you for having me.
So let's talk about what inspired you to start this organization. When did that moment happen for you?
I don't think it's one moment, but I think it's over a long period of time, um, many dots that eventually connected into sort of one big dot. And so obviously I was born in Laos and came here was I was very young. And didn't know much about sort of the circumstances and the history of why our family came here. And so as I started to learn, first by personal history and stories from my parents, which were still not a full picture, and starting to piece all of that together, and then learning also from other Lao Americans that I met or the diaspora from Laos about their stories, which sounded quite familiar and similar, as well as just to the larger political context of, how did, over, 300,000 Lao Americans come to the US, right? And so from all of that, both personal experience and learning, as well as learning about just sort of the larger political context, led me to learn more about this story of a secret war in Laos that was conducted by the U.S. And as part of that war, there was massive bombings that took place over a 9-year period. And so that was something that I really didn't know about growing up. Like I knew, sort of why my family fled, but really didn't know what was left behind. And so, as I learned more about the history of the war, and in particular this bombing campaign that took place over a 9-year period, which is now considered the most bombed country per capita, right? So over a 9-year period between 1964 and 1973, 2 million tons of bombs were dropped on Laos. And that equates to a B-52 plane load being dropped every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for a 9-year period. And of course, what was shocking was that, Laos is considered the most bombed country per capita, but when I was growing up, very few people even knew where Laos was. And so that sort of inspired me to think about like why isn't that people not know about this history, and it wasn't just about history, right? Because people were still being hurt and maimed from bombs that were dropped 40 years ago because many of them never detonated. And so all this history, I think, sort of culminated in my sort of desire to not only reconnect with sort of my history, but also, to really reflect on what I can do to help bring something positive from part of that history that was so dark. And also the fact that people are still being killed and maimed. People, as young as, several months old, someone as young as 7. And thinking about, when I left, I was 7, right? And the opportunities I think I have here, I feel incredibly fortunate, and I hope that through the work that we do through Legacies, that we'll be able to provide opportunities for other children to make sure that they live in a safe environment. And so that became the inspiration.
So, what were you doing at the time, and how did you transition this work? Because I'm sure that there are people out there watching this thinking that they want to do something, they have a cause they believe in, and they want to do more, and they're looking around and there's nobody else doing it perhaps, and they want to make a stand, but they don't know, like, how can I do this? How did you manage that? I mean, obviously you were working, but when you knew you had to, there was no other choice, because sometimes your passions just kind of take you wherever. How did you do that?
So I've always sort of done nonprofit work, right? So that's always been, from like working and volunteering with the Red Cross when I was in middle school, right? Making like toys for underprivileged kids, right? So it sort of started very young, and I've always stuck with sort of nonprofit sector, not necessarily related to Laos or even the Lao American community, but it was related to supporting immigrants and refugees in many different areas. And so that desire was always there, and it was percolating right towards this then eventually Legacies. And when Legacies first started, I was working still in the nonprofit sector, and couldn't just immediately transition, right? So it was about building slowly and incubating this project, and at the same time, making sure that I was able to, still have insurance, and how do you do a startup and still feel supported, right? Because I think oftentimes people sort of take this deep dive without any water in the pool, right? And so I think figuring out what are the resources and support that you can pull together to help you emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, and work on having a holistic approach and sustainable approach to any venture, right? Because I think all of us are incredibly passionate about about many things. And it's making sure that every day you wake up and you're still thinking about that, right? That it's not just a flash in the pan and then you're on to the next idea, right? And so, this percolated for several years, before I started to think about, okay, what are the different pieces that will be needed in order to move forward with this work? Because it's not going to happen overnight. And I think oftentimes people hope and want it to happen overnight. And oftentimes people expect it to happen overnight, right? But oftentimes that's not the case. And it's figuring out, how do you develop a very sound support system that helps you to incubate, allows you to make mistakes, allows you to take risks, but always having some sort of anchor, whether it's a job and then you work, after 5, after 6, and from 6 until 1 or 2 in the morning is your other passion, right? And so it's a lot of, I think it's a lot of work, a lot of behind the scenes work, right, before you can really share with the world, your vision and what you hope for. And a lot of it is also about bringing other people, right, into the work and to have it be shared, right?
Channapha, what is the mission of Legacies of War, and how have you, since the moment you decided to be the visionary and make it happen, how has that evolved over time, and how has your support been?
The mission of Legacies is threefold. One is to raise awareness about the history of the bombing in Laos. 2 is to provide space for healing the wounds of war. And then 3rd is to really provide resources to clear the bombs in Laos, the leftover bombs in Laos.
Okay. And you talked about healing and space for that. Can you go into more details around that? Are there education programs? What type of programs are available? Because, and I know that, as you speak, there are a lot of people from all over the world who have come from war-torn countries. And so I'd love for them to know about the programs and maybe inspire other organizations as well.
Sure. The one thing before I go into specific programs is just to share that we take a really holistic approach to the work that we do, right? So, our ultimate sort of advocacy goal is to make sure that more support is provided to help clear the bombs, to provide support for victims that have been maimed or families that have lost their children or husbands or wives. And then 3rd is to make sure that the new generation in Laos are educated about the dangers of these UXL, right? So all the funding that is raised, which we do by mobilizing the general public, working with people actually in Congress who care about this issue, who can help to raise funds. But that's like the ultimate goal, right? But what we do through our educational programming is quite holistic, right? So our sort of tagline for Legacies of War is history, healing, hope. And it's a continuum, right? So this work is a continuum, and it's recognizing that transformation and change happens both at the individual, at the community level, and then a much broader level, right? So we really have to focus on where people are. And in our community, that has a lot of war-torn experiences, there's so much trauma, there's so much hurt. And for those who might have not, that are younger, they might not even know anything about what happened, right? And so with the history part, it's really educating people about what happened, also bringing in voices that have lived through that experience to help educate people about what they went through. And so that's sort of the healing part. And we do that through traveling exhibitions, we do that through community panel discussions, we bring together survivors as well as veterans, who actually dropped the bombs and are now really working with us to make sure that children born 40 years later aren't being killed and maimed by actions that they took 4 decades ago. Right, so that's sort of the history part, is the educational component, and then the healing part, which I think is really one of the most meaningful parts of our work, is really to provide a way for people to engage wherever they might be. They might be angry at what happened. They might be traumatized by what happened, or they might be just wanting to share their stories. We've done film screenings where afterwards we would have a Q&A session where someone from the audience would stand up and talk for the first time and share for the first time their experiences of war and refuge. And those are so important because oftentimes I think when people go through trauma and go through such a traumatic experience, there's a sense of shame around that, and there's a sense of silence, right? Either one, because there's shame from that experience, as if, by fate, this happened to us because it was karma, right? And then there are others who remain silent because they don't feel that the pain and suffering that they've experienced should be passed on to the next generation. But in reality, the younger generation are so desperate to learn and to hear about what their parents and their grandparents went through, right? And so providing space and dialogue, for dialogue around that, I think is one of the most important work that we do. And then the third part is, so you go through sort of the education and the healing process, and then what can you do? What can we collectively do? And that's sort of the hope part, right? And that's the advocacy work that we do. So it's really, wherever you may be in that personal journey, we provide space for you to connect and to engage wherever you might be.
So tell me more about the advocacy piece of your work, because obviously without the awareness piece, if no one knows the Legacies of War's mission and the action taken to create that, to reach that mission of awareness and history and healing, none of that would be possible without support. So how do you go about getting people to understand and connect with the mission?
There are many ways in which we do our education and awareness raising work. So we've been around for now about 8 years, and we've been doing it through integrating a lot of arts and culture into our pieces, right? So oftentimes when we do exhibitions, it's a really culmination of many voices, right, that contribute to the displays and the show. It could be present voices, as in the drawings that we had collected from bombing survivors, right, which tells the story of what actually happened and how people lived under daily constant bombings. Every 8 minutes, imagine, you're in the middle of a meal and bombings would have gone off multiple times within that half an hour. Imagine not being able to farm during the daytime, and so you have to do it at night, right? So that's sort of the historical voices, and then you also have pieces of present-day voices that contribute, to that. And so the exhibition is, quite important. But in the past several years, we haven't been able to secure and bring voices from Laos who are actually living amongst these bombs. And so this past April, we were so fortunate to, through the support of the State Department, bring two people who intimately are connected to this issue. One was a bombing survivor, actually a UXO survivor, Tumi Silampan, who at the age of 8 got his hand blown off while he was digging for bamboo shoot. And since then, he was, he of course was incredibly depressed and really didn't want to live. And through some really amazing support from family and others, he was able to continue to go to school, finish school, and now is an executive director of his own NGO that supports other survivors as well as victims. And so that was just a remarkable story, and the second person that we brought was a female deminer, somebody who actually goes out into the field. She's a mother of 2, Manicia Tor is part of an all-female demining team. And every day she goes out and she works to clear the land so that her community, doesn't have to face this. And then her child, who's 2 years old, will not have to live with this, over the next generation. And so, these are incredibly inspirational people, and they're 24, 25 years old. That means that they were born, about 15, 20 years after the last bombs were dropped. So this is a new generation, but we're also incredibly inspired by the fact that the people in Laos, can help to solve this problem, right? But with limited resources, they're not able to really reach the full capacity of what they're able to do, which is to remove the bombs quicker, and to make sure that victims are supported if there are accidents that occur. And so through this Voices from Laos Speakers Tour, Tumi and Manasseh traveled to 12 different cities throughout the US, 17 events, just to share their stories.
Wow.
And it was amazing, the people that showed up. It was intergenerational. It was sort of like the older generation who remember all of this so well as those who were hearing it for the first time. And so, and then, Tumi and Manasseh are so inspirational in sharing their story, and with incredible dignity, right? So it wasn't about feeling sorry for them, because they're actually incredibly able people, right? And they would just want to share that together, this problem can be solved. And it requires people in Laos, and it requires people here. And so, in all of this, each of us can do our small part to contribute to a safer future.
Which is a huge part of a more safe global environment for everybody involved. So it's just so powerful. I'm listening to you, and it just reminds me of all the questions that I had as a child coming to the U.S. and not really being able to talk to my parents about it, because it was just too painful for them to go back and relive that. And it wasn't until I actually wrote my book that I actually healed as well in areas that I didn't even think I needed healing from. So imagine the people that you touch every day. So thanks for doing all this amazing work. I really commend Legacies of War.
Thank you. Yeah, you say, thanking me, but there's a whole, hundreds and hundreds of people over the past 8 years that have contributed their time and energy and stories to, and then just, support, to make sure that Legacies continues to be able to do our work and our mission. When Legacies was launched, for the first 5 years, it was volunteer driven. I was working full-time job, and just kept incubating and building it up. And, it was a lot of sacrifices for so many people, right? Because it was all driven. And, we used to have these board calls on a weekly basis, and when I share that with people, it was like, when we first started, the first 3-4 years, our board members got on the phone on a weekly basis and talked for an hour, and some board members, some board meetings don't only occur 4 times a year, and so it was just this tremendous, collective effort and commitment, from everyone who really shared this vision, and so, so there's so many people that have been involved through the years to really get us to the point where we've been able to, quadruple the amount of funding that the U.S. is providing. But we also know that there's so much more to do, because less than 1% of what was dropped and unexploded has actually been cleared. Wow. Yeah, so we have a long ways to go to make sure that the number of deaths continue to get reduced. And we've made some progress over the past several years. When we first started, the death toll was about 300 per year. Now we're under 100.
Okay.
And so,
progress.
that's incredible progress.
I'd love to see that be 0.
Yeah, exactly.
But
exactly.
It's progress, and it's something worth celebrating.
Yeah. And so,
How can we support Legacies of War? I mean, what can we do in the general public to help with funding, with events, with volunteer? What do you need?
Everything. Everything. We're still, over the last 8 years, we've been very fortunate to have amazing volunteers who care so deeply, and we try to engage them in whatever their strengths and assets and interests are, from event planning to fundraising. We always need, funding. We're still just one full-time staff, and that's me. And Right now, we have interns that will come throughout the year who are incredibly supportive. And then depending on the project we have going, like for the tour, we brought on 4 different consultants, over the short period of time. And so it all sort of evolves and changes in terms of our needs. We're a small nonprofit that I think has been incredibly effective, and so funding support, donations is always helpful, because the funds that we raise through the State Department, with the exception of the tour, the education tour that we did, all that money goes to the ground. On the ground to the great NGOs that are doing work directly with survivors, or to clear the land, to educate young people. None of that funding actually comes to Legacies. And so all the money that we raise, it's through private individuals that really are passionate about this issue, people who are learning about it, and then through small grants and foundations, and that's how we've been able to support the work through the years.
So where can we support? If people are watching out there and want to give a small donation, large donation, learn more about the advocacy work and the education programs and the healing programs, where can we find information? How can we get on your newsletters, all that?
Sure. So we have a wonderful website, legaciesof.war.org. We're also on Facebook, Twitter. We're doing a Reddit Ask Me Anything with a former ambassador just this week. So we're pretty much social online, but the website's probably a good way to start.
Okay, great. And any thoughts around what's next for Legacies? Like, what's the ultimate goal for the organization? Your biggest hopes and dreams for Legacies?
Yeah. I hope that we go out of business soon. I hope that we complete our mission, and we see that possibly happening within the next 5 to 10 years, which means that we'll have sustained support from the U.S. and other international donors to make sure that over the next 10 years we really double, if not triple, the amount of resources and capacity to really expedite the removal. And we know that it's possible. We know that, through the past 5 years, the death rates have really declined. More land has been cleared. And so we're incredibly hopeful, and we think that, within the next 5 to 10 years, we will be able to say mission accomplished, and thank you. Yeah.
Any final thoughts for people who are watching that may really be interested in getting into advocacy work?
Yeah, I think, if anything, our work has, and this issue that we work with has proven that it really takes really a small amount of committed individuals to really move on an issue. And there hasn't been a meeting we've gone to on the Hill and in Congress where staff members or congressional members have not said this is the right thing to do, and they just didn't know about it. Yeah, and so if you're interested and passionate about an issue, make sure you know about it, you learn, you do your homework, you know what you're advocating on, it's sound, you have data to support it, and continue doing it, because oftentimes people just don't know that an issue exists, or that there's a problem, or that help is needed, and you just need to be a voice for that.
So the message is be a voice for what you believe in. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you sharing all of your passion, and it's inspiring to know that you are living for a cause and a purpose. And I hope that those that are watching are really inspired by this piece. Please check out legaciesof.war.org. Learn more. Do what you can to support and be inspired by some of their incredible stories and the art and the exhibits out there. So see you next time on Tea with Mali.